Upchurch. So I've been thinking about where to insert the musical saw performance of my presentation. I'm going to lead with it so I can point back to, I'm going to try and illustrate some metaphors. We'll see how well it goes. And it's an appropriate instrument for a sculptor, perhaps, who works with wood. And this is an instrument that,
I told you it was cheap.
I saw a movie years ago, Delicatessen, Jean-Paul Genet. And most of you might know him from Amélie, but it's a crazy film, but there's this great scene where the protagonist and another character play a duet between cello and musical saw, and I was just enchanted. And I was like, maybe I can figure out how to play that. So how this works is you need to bend the saw, but you have to bend it a special way. If I just do it in a straight curve, it's not really going to sing. You need to put a little bit of an S curve into it. Once the S curve is there, you get a little bit of tone, and then there's a sweet spot. So if you play it with the bow, you need to know where your sweet spot is. And an interesting thing about this, it's obviously like the most fretless instrument there is in the world. There's no references. As you bend it more, where you need to play needs to move. If your thumb is in a different place, then everything's in a different spot. If the seat is in a different height. So it's all kind of played by ear and a little bit like flow, sort of like you're whistling and just going from note to note as opposed to anything percussive or anything like that. Another interesting thing about it is, because it's fretless and you need to have such perfect pitch to land, players will do a little bit of a vibrato. So a nervous knee will be jiggling. And the thing about that is that it does two things. One, that vibrato amplifies the tone, so it makes it louder. It also makes it so that if the note is here, the actual perfect pitch note that you're wanting to hit is here, you're wiggling around it. And the listener is like, oh, there it is, there it is, there it is. The listener does the work, it's kind of interactive, of hearing the note where it's supposed to be, and you have a little bit of wiggle room, but you don't have to be quite as precise. And you can play songs. This is the first song I ever learned how to play on musical saw, and when a guy in West Virginia at a bar gave me tips on how to play, he played the same song. So it's obviously appropriate for as I try and make sense of other things. So when I've given talks before, I will make reference to my misspent youth as a musician, but it's just kind of in passing. But because the theme of the show is to try and tie how music informs studio practice and the work and so on, I'm going to try and tie a number of different tethers back to that. As my colleagues here, you have a history in your relationship with music. My parents weren't really into music. They were listening to whatever the adult contemporary of the 1960s and 70s would be. So a lot of Herb Alpert and Tijuana Brass, which is a good band. But not particularly musical people. I wrote my first song when I was 4. It was in a minor key. I'm not going to share it with you, but I was probably inspired by the Rod McEwen version of the Charlie Brown's theme, A Boy Named Charlie Brown, which is a really sad song for kids to be listening to. But anyway, Anyway, and I was in, choir when I was in grade school, and I played recorder with a really, really stern music teacher who scared the heck out of me. I would fake sick to not go to music class. But I didn't really learn an instrument or do anything more than that until I went off to college. And my freshman roommate played guitar and he taught me a couple chords, and I had a friend who played clarinet who taught me a few of the rudiments to play clarinet. But the fact that I went off to college and art school and was learning, kind of my identity as a musician at the same time, there's a lot of cross-wiring between how I think about my visual art and my creative practice. So in art school, I did the thing that a lot of us do, and I got in a band. There's a lot of great art school bands, many of you have heard of, some of you haven't, probably haven't heard of ours. But one of my former bandmates is here tonight, a dear friend. And we played, and we went from playing gallery openings to playing in clubs, and somehow thought, you know what we should do? We should move to Chicago and make it big. And we moved to Chicago. And we did okay, and we toured the country, and we put out records, and in a very Spinal Tap moment, at one point, we actually got to Japan. But as far as the creative practice, that was a really intense, collaborative creative practice where you're starting with nothing and wanting to make, specific things, songs in that case. And we were a little bit of an odd band because we would change instruments. You might start the set playing musical saw, and then later you'd be on guitar, and later you'd be on saxophone. You might come into a practice session where you're wanting to write a song, and you would introduce a melody. And you'd be working it, and at a certain point, you discover, oh, I'm not playing the melody anymore. The melody has now moved over to vibraphone, and I'm on banjo or something like that. It's whatever makes the shape of the song work well. And we were very much you would acquire instruments at pawn shops and flea markets and so on. And it looked interesting, and like, as with the musical saw, I'm intrigued by what I might be able to do with that. I used to tell people, well, I own a banjo. I wouldn't necessarily say I was a banjo player, but you could get enough done that in the context of the group, in the context of the song, what you were making made sense. And then you slowly carve away those skill sets or what you understand about how that instrument makes music. And that relates to what I do in my studio practice, in that I do woodworking, a little bit of metalworking, I do some ceramics, I do some steam bending, I steal from what jewelers do, I steal from what furniture makers do, I do some stuff with rope, I do anything that I am intrigued by as a material or as a process, I will try and adopt and learn from and see if I can make something that's interesting. Zach was talking about the depth of history that exists in ceramics as a technology, and all of those different, there's languages and there's forms and all of this culture that is embedded in these objects that we make from whatever craft it might be. And being able to pull from that is something that I really sort of enjoy, to tap into that visual language that we understand at an almost subconscious level. Now, as far as music goes, there's a couple quotes I can share with you. Walter Pater, who is a British writer from 19th century, who some of you might know is the guy who came up with the art for art's sake adage. He said at one point that all art aspires to the condition of music. All art wants to be what music can do. And thinking about that, I'm like, well, it does this. Music is direct. Music doesn't require a translation. You don't have to, you can have someone like Beethoven say, oh, well, the Pastoral Symphony is about a spring day and a storm hits, but you don't need that to feel what you're feeling. And the character of the emotion that you'll feel from listening to a piece of music is, it'll change based on the orchestra that's playing, it'll change based on where you're listening, where you're at that time in your life. There are this infinite range of, flavors of sadness that can be evoked by music. And my other quote is Mendelssohn, who said that the fact that I cannot put into words what my favorite music makes me feel is not because the music is too indefinite, not because those feelings are too indefinite, but because it's too definite. And it can't make the leap over into language. Language is too coarse. And so one of my cop-out answers when I'm asked at openings or whatever, what's your music about, or what's your art is about, I'll be like, well, if I could talk about it, I would just do that, because it would be a lot easier than all of this hunting and finding and refining. And I think that's an aspect of music that it's this magical thing. And there's some neurolinguists who will say that music predated language as far as a means of communication, which is why it hits the way that it hits. Let's see. And our relationship to a piece of music, to tap a little bit more of neuroscience, we relate to a piece of music the way we relate to a living being. We don't think of it like a hammer. We think of it in the way that we think of something that is alive, because it exists in time, and it changes based on how it's listened to. And to describe it to another person, just as you're trying to tell someone about a dear friend, you can list your facts, and you can say, well, she's 35 and she works at the bank, and you can, good sense of humor, but eventually you get to the point, well, you really just have to meet her. And music is like that. And when I think about my work and what I'm trying to create is like a piece of instrumental music that somehow, with its associations of material and texture and form, will evoke something that gets you sort of thinking or feeling along those lines. A set of cheater notes, which I seem to have lost, to keep me on track here a little bit. That's all good stuff. All right. So as far as sculpture, for those of you who are not familiar, most of my materials, I'd say 95% of materials are salvaged. I find them in alleys or dumpsters or in estate sales or whatever. There's a certain amount of found objects that I employ, but at this point, for the most part, it's raw materials that I'm looking for. When I employ a found object, it's for one of two reasons usually. One is a little bit like, oh, it's right there and it's perfect, and why should I build it? The flip side of that is if I find myself too fascinated with a certain found object, I'm like, I should figure out how to make one of those, and so suddenly I know how to turn things on a lathe or something like that. The other one is there's a certain response that we have to a manufactured object with precise lines and geometry that gives you a sense of certainty and a sense of intent and authority. And it's a weird thing where you can just place something that has some solid right angles on it, and you're suddenly like, yeah, someone did that on purpose. And then the thought is, why? But it lends a touch of the human. Zach was referring to right brain, left brain, but the left brain really, really likes things like that are definable and solid and human-made, whereas the right brain tends to enjoy the holistic picture. And that flutter between the detail and the bigger picture is something that is, I think, pretty powerful to engage and navigate. I do think of sculpture and even, actually any artwork as time-based. With the sculpture, it's probably a little bit more apparent because you walk around it and it changes. The perception, I refer to certain views of my pieces as moments because it kind of locks in from a certain view. But even, with Lucie's drawings, as you travel through, the story of the line work, you're in control of how fast time is moving.
Please try again.
It's hard. But in a way, it becomes interactive, in that you're playing almost like you have your, on like a YouTube video, you're controlling the scrubber and you're moving to the moments that you want to see or revisit or something, or moving slowly. And referring back to the saw, that notion of the interactivity, you have a pitch that is varying, but it's the listener that is locking it in to the actual song. When I build, I don't have any kind of plan. I was actually fascinated to learn that Margie does not start with a sketch. But I don't start with really anything. I usually start with an object. Sometimes it's a found object or just a salvage board or something like that, but it's a little bit like a musical improvisation. And the partner in the improvisation is that object or is that piece of material, and it's asking for something. This piece back here on the little sideboard began with that central disc. It was just a steel circle. It had a whole bunch of scratches in it. And I was looking at those, and they put me in mind of spectral emission lines. When the physicists look and point at the stars, and they're able to be like, oh, this is emitting, that's how we know what the stars are made of, hydrogen, helium, whatever it might be. And so I was reminded of those and etched in the lines of, that's the spectral emission of carbon. And then I had that. I'm like, well, it needs to be in something. Something needs to be enclosing it. And I came up with the bent wood stuff, and everything is just one step by one step. There's never oh, I'm building this, and now I just have to build it, which would be really boring. I've done this, now what does it need? What is it asking for? And to echo what Margie had said, there's a certain point where it's not asking for anything else. And that in itself plays out the way that a song might play out. You're listening to it, and you have a certain set of expectations, which might be satisfied or upended as the song kind of progresses. And there's usually a point where you're getting towards the end, and there's resolution, and that's a very exciting time in the studio because you're almost done. And I wanted to speak about one more thing before I wrap up my semi-prepared remarks. But when the four of us were meeting and planning the show, it came up, well, should we have some kind of visual theme, something that's uniting, or should we all work on a piece that has a certain kind of image? And we came up with this idea of a horn or a cone, and I'm going to throw into that mix a lens. And these are all things that a horn can either collect sound. There's an illustration of Lucie's on the other wall, which is a big listening station. It can broadcast, like some of Zach's pieces. And a lens can focus in and then open back out. So if I'm thinking about Margie's work, you have these enclosures and you look in and then things are sort of transformed. But music, a song, I think, can also be like that, in that your attention is focused and your attention is drawn in for that period of time as you move through the piece, and hopefully then broadens back out. Like I was always told an essay is supposed to be shaped when I was in high school. You start broad, you get specific, and then you widen it back out again. But there's that intense moment in the center where you're dealing with all of the details. And that's about all I have. Any questions?
For any of us.
Yeah, for any of us? Yeah.
You think about artist, musician, or musician, artist, that are just the others that are out there in the world. You think of like David Byrne, right? He's a good example of that. I don't know if you want to have any other to share.
Nick Cave, not our own local Nick Cave, but Nick Cave of the Bad Seeds. Nick Cave is now a ceramicist.
Yeah.
And in Chicago, there's, because of the art school band pipeline, a lot of the artists I know a lot of the musicians I know are also visual artists. There's all kinds of folks that I know.
I'm sorry, I have to shout out, Mark Lawndale's own Marvin Tate is a performance poet, jazz musician, who tours with the Astor Gates, and
Oh.
he does beautiful little found object dioramas and sculpture to put his work into a gallery, really real.
Something real.
Laurie Anderson.
Yeah, Lori.
Here we go, yeah.
Oh, Lonnie Holly also? It's also Lonnie Holly. I don't know if I pronounce his name right, but he's an incredible, I don't know if it's outsider art because everything is art, and it's always like a weird definition now, but he makes these assemblages, and it's about motif and repetition, and it's very trance-inducing, and seeing him live with people who didn't know what the hell was happening was awesome. Yeah, highly recommend. Oh,
But as far as other local folks, one of my former bandmates, Archer Pruitt, Sam Prekop, who else?
And Nick Case, because his sound suits.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Johnny Hernan. Johnny Machine.
I just started thinking about Fluxus too, like, I wonder if Fluxus has, you know, these happenings where, like, now I need to have a research project, I think.
Hey, John,
Yeah.
when you work, what do you play in the background, or do you listen?
It depends on what I'm doing. My practice or my habit is to go in the studio in the morning and clean up the mess I made the day before. That requires something upbeat. You know, ska is pretty common. And then it depends on what I'm making. There's a lot of mellow stuff that I listen to. Franz Casillas is a Haitian guitarist. I love listening to his stuff in the studio. If it's something that is what you might call meditative or boring, then I might listen to an audiobook or something like that because I can think about the two. It's a level of how much of my mind needs to be engaged with what I'm doing. But I do like to work on things that are slower and more meditative, that making travels at the speed of thought, as opposed to, I only use power tools when I have to.
Should we all answer that question? Yeah. I don't listen to music when I work. I just listen to, I'm meditating when I'm working. I'm not thinking, I'm trying not to think. I'm trying to stay in my subconscious, so I'm not listening to music. And music can take me out of the space, so I just focus on the work and go.
That's gonna be a long list, because I was like, oh yeah, music, I'm gonna dive into the history of music, blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, I started with these like noise compilations from like the 70s until now, and it was just like, just a lot of things. And then, yeah, thinking about the active listening, I was also like, oh, maybe it's not silence, maybe it's like a drone music. So I listened to a song by Pauline Oliveros called Cloud Horse. Horse from the Cloud. I mean, it was beautiful, but it's just like a sustained note, and then things appear, and it's beautiful. And I cried so many times. And then there's this composer called York Frey, also very just like about silence and yeah, kind of like sound bowls and meditation. And then I got bored, and then I was like, okay, you know what? I really need to survive this month of like just drawing, and I started listening to Magma, and that was cool. It's like prog rock from France, and it's awesome. There's like the newest album is about the nothingness, like the day it comes, and so it's a musical explosion. And then I was like, okay, I'm just gonna listen to post-punk, and so I listened to a lot of like Fugazi and Idols, and I was like very pumped up. At the end, I was like, okay. And then this piece is about especially Bulgarian chants, and it's probably one of the most beautiful, weird, from outer space music ever. It's just like women choir, and I cry every time. Every time. It's just so yeah, that's it. I think this is
I played those when my daughter was born.
oh well. Here
She's
you go.
Bulgarian too.
By choice or the?
No, by
She
birth.
became, okay. Yeah. That's a good reason.
Wow, yeah, I couldn't probably get into a whole list of things. I think kind of like John was saying, like, I'm really similar, there's a variety of things. You know, I'm not into like crystals, but like, you know how people with crystals are like, oh yeah, this has got some energy, you know, and then it like gets, yeah, right, and then it gets used up, and then you tossed it, you know, I mean, that sounds so kitschy, I don't know. But like music is I feel like that a lot of the time, or like there's definitely like my greatest hits, right? And then, but when I'm like in the studio, I'm like, ooh, I need to like find that thing that just, I don't know, there's either some sort of, you know, hook or whatever, just something like the way that like jazz music, you know, it's like, oh, that thing is just like a little off key in a weird place, or a little off beat that's like, it just engages that little problem solving part of my brain that's like not so complete and not so rested, that I'm just intrigued by it. I'm always like looking for that. And so like get hooked on something for a little while, and then, okay, and then it's sort of like, so I'm like, all right, let's try something else, you know, and it really affects my studio energy though, I noticed. I mean, it's like, the right music can be like the best cup of coffee, you know, or it can just lull me to sleep. So, always music. I'm sure people don't, you know, always appreciate it. I don't hear those folks as much. But yeah, pretty much I'm always blaring something. And it's like, it's a variety of things. Like I listen, you know, to jazz and, you know, to folk, to, you know, 60s stuff, to, you know, I mean, I'll listen to tube and throat singing. You know, it's just, yeah. You know, anything that's new or interesting or engaging, yeah, that's pretty much it.
We good, guys? Thank you for coming. The show goes till May 23rd. So if you see something you love and needs to come home with you, talk to it. Work that out. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.